Diddy's ex wrapped up her testimony today after 4 grueling days on the stand. That's Cassie Ventura, who's 9 months pregnant, leaving her home and heading to federal court today. The defense hit her hard during cross-examination, asking her about a stint in rehab for PTSD.
Diddy's ex wrapped up her testimony today after 4 grueling days on the stand. That's Cassie Ventura, who's 9 months pregnant, leaving her home and heading to federal court today. The defense hit her hard during cross-examination, asking her about a stint in rehab for PTSD. He was used to being in control of the studio of the room of people. But on that day in that courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs lost control of something he never expected his face. It wasn't just the bright lights or the air-conditioned silence of the federal courthouse. It was the moment Don Richard walked through the door, a woman from his past once under his label, once close enough to know the parts of his world he tried to keep buried, and when she sat down, lifted her right hand and took the oath. Something shifted. His expression went blank, then pale, like he knew what was coming. Like he remembered exactly what she saw. No cameras were allowed in that room, but witnesses remember the tension the kind. You could feel in your spine jurors leaned forward. His lawyers froze. Diddy's eyes locked on Dawn, and he didn't blink for a full 10 seconds. It wasn't the first testimony that week, but it was the first time he looked scared before she said a single word. The prosecution introduced her, Mrs. Richard. You were affiliated with Bad Boy Records from 2004 to 2011. Correct? She nodded. That's correct, and during that time you witnessed things involving the defendant. Mr. Combs, another nod, this time slower, and then the room held its breath. But to understand why that moment hit him so hard, you need to know what happened earlier that day before dawn. Richard ever took the stand when a federal agent exposed the secrets hidden behind the gold-trimmed door of Diddy's luxury suite at the Park Hyatt Hotel for most of his career. Diddy moved through rooms like a king. Red carpets, champagne toasts, private jets waiting on the tarmac. But inside that courtroom, none of it mattered. The name on the charges was Sean Combs, and the government wasn't playing games. The courtroom wasn't flashy, just white walls, dark wood panels, and the weight of federal law pressing on every word. And on May 16, 2025, that weight came crashing down when prosecutors began the 5th day of the trial with a witness that silenced the room. A special agent from Homeland Security Investigations. He walked in calm, professional, bulletproof on the stand. His job title, Human Trafficking Division, Crisis Negotiation Team. In other words, not the kind of person who gets involved unless something very serious is going on. Where do you work? Case I am part of the trafficking unit, and what was your involvement in this case? I executed a search at Mr. Combs's hotel room. After his arrest, the words dropped heavy. Everyone knew about the arrest, it had made headlines. But this was the first time anyone was hearing under oath what law enforcement actually found behind that hotel door. That door, room 2115 at the Park Hyatt in Manhattan, had been rented under his name, a luxury suite, the kind you'd expect from someone of his caliber. But what was inside didn't match the glamour. Can you describe what you found in the room? We assigned a letter to each area and began the search. The agent was methodical, clinical. He had no agenda, no drama, just facts in this ear closet. We found plastic bags filled with Johnson & Johnson baby oil bottles of Astroglide in the bathroom. More baby oil bottles. Child with him. Jurors also heard an audio recording where Cassie could be heard threatening to kill a Diddy associate who had video of one of her freak-offs with Diddy. The jurors were shocked. I saw the eyebrows raw in a Louis Vuitton bag, a prescription bottle, with the name Frank Black containing pink powder packets. And what did the lab results say? They tested positive for ketamine and MDMA. The room went silent, then came the photo evidence, then the physical evidence. Jurors were shown the actual bags, the bottles, the pills. Each item was marked, logged, and presented. The agent didn't blink. He continued in a black duffel bag. We discovered $9.00 in cash. Where was it located? Near the foot of the bed. And what did you do with the cash? I asked Agent Binda to retrieve it. She did, unfolding the bills like a dealer laying cards on a table. Everything was documented. Everything was sealed. The jury didn't need to imagine anything. It was all there in front of them. Then the prosecution asked a question that hinted at something more intimate. Did you find any evidence that a woman had been staying in the room with Mr. Combs? Yes. Clothing. Handbags. That was the last question. No theatrics, just confirmation. Did? He sat still, jaw tight. His defense had nothing to say, not yet, but the prosecution wasn't finished, Your Honor. The government now calls Don Richard to the stand, and that's when everything changed. Room 215 was supposed to be private, a luxury cocoon far above the noise of the city. But once the warrant was signed, privacy didn't matter anymore. The door opened under federal authority, and what the Y'all agents found inside turned a high-profile arrest into something darker, more intimate and impossible to ignore. They didn't just walk in blind, they had a strategy. Each section of the suite was labeled ABC. Like a grid on a crime scene, they weren't just looking. For evidence, they were documenting a lifestyle. The closet was first a standard place for shoes, suits, designer jackets. But behind the hangers and polished leather, something else was packed. Multiple plastic bags filled with baby oil. Not one, not two, but several bottles, all neatly organized, and not just any brand. Johnson & Johnson, the kind you'd find in a nursery, not a celebrity penthouse next to them. Astrolide, dozens of bottles still sealed, lined up like supplies in storage. It didn't look like something someone used. It looked like something someone stocked in the bathroom. More of the same shelves holding duplicates of the same product. Agents paused. They took pictures. They logged everything. Form 651 was filled line by line. Then came the moment everyone would remember: the Louis Vuitton bag on the bedside table. At first glance, it looked like any other high-end accessory, the kind celebrities carry through airports, but inside, instead of sunglasses or headphones, there was a prescription bottle. The name on the label, Frank Black, a name not found on any staff list, not registered to the room inside the bottle. Pink powder packets neatly folded. Not something you buy at a pharmacy. Agents didn't guess, they tested. The powder came back as ketamine and MDMA. Two substances known for their association with both parties and coercion. Two substances that can blur memory, dull resistance, and erase clarity. The courtroom didn't need interpretation. The lab report spoke for itself. Then came the black duffel bag tucked near the foot of the bed. It looked ordinary, but when Agent Binda opened it in front of the jury, it wasn't clothing or personal items. It was cash, $9, in bundled bills stacked in loose fan shapes. No explanation, no receipts, just money. The kind that disappears fast and leaves no paper trail. The prosecution didn't need to raise their voice. The evidence did the talking, and the jurors, they were leaning in now, listening. Not just with their ears, but with their eyes. The visual weight of what they were being shown was undeniable. One final question: did anything in the room suggest that Mr. Combs was alone during his stay? The agent nodded. No. There were female clothes and handbags throughout the suite. Someone else had been staying there. That wasn't an accusation. It was a detail, the kind that changes everything. Because when a man already facing federal charges is found in a hotel room with designer bags, party drugs, baby oil, and bundles of cash, questions write themselves. The air in the courtroom turned still, no chatter, no shifting in chairs, just silence. And that was before Don Richard even spoke. She walked into the courtroom, with her head high, not in defiance, but in survival. Don Richard, once a pop icon, once a protege of Diddy himself, now stood as one of the most anticipated witnesses in a federal case that threatened to destroy the empire he spent decades building. For those who only knew her from Danny Kaye, she was the voice behind hits the face on magazine covers. But inside that courtroom, she wasn't a performer. She was a woman who had seen too much, who had stayed quiet for too long. Please state your name for the record. Dawn Angelique Richard. Her voice was calm, but her eyes told another story. One of restraint, pain, clarity. She had been part of Bad Boy Records from 2004 to 2011.
Diddy's ex wrapped up her
7 years of
today
close proximity to Diddy.
Grueling days
7
on the
years
stand.
watching, learning,
That's Cassie
protecting
Ventura, who's
herself.
9 months pregnant,
And during that time, she
leaving her
became
home
more than
and
just a
heading to
singer.
federal
She
court
became
today.
a witness. The prosecution
defense
didn't
hit
ease
her
into
hard
it.
during cross-examination,
Miss Richard, do you recognize
asking
this
her about a
individual?
stint
They
in
held up a
rehab for
photograph.
PTSD.
She looked, yes, that's Cassie Ventura, the woman. At the center of the storm, the woman whose lawsuit filed months prior ignited the investigation that led to Diddy's arrest. But Cassie wasn't the only one with a story. Don had one too, one she'd never told publicly. Can you describe an incident? That took place in 2009, involving Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura. Her lips tightened, her hands clasped. We were at his home in Los Angeles, she began. We were working recording. She didn't say the word safe, because it wasn't. Diddy started yelling. He said, "Where's my food?" Then it escalated fast. He grabbed a frying pan, it had eggs in it. He tried to hit her with it aimed for her head. The courtroom was silent. She fell curled into a fetal position. He didn't stop. He kicked her, hit her, then dragged her down to the first floor. Dawn paused, swallowed. There was glass breaking, screaming. I was afraid for her and for myself. The room sat frozen. You could hear breath catching in chests, eyes shifting between Dawn and Diddy, whose face had gone still. Almost unreadable, but not unbothered. Did you intervene? No. Did you call the police? No. Why not? Because I was terrified. We were told it was better if we didn't talk, that people could disappear. The implication was chilling. This wasn't just about violence, it was about control. A system of silence wrapped in wealth, power, and fear. And for years, she had kept it inside until... Now what she described wasn't a single outburst, it was a pattern. One that matched Cassie's lawsuit in eerie, devastating detail. A man demanding total obedience, a woman broken down, isolated, and a circle of bystanders too scared to say a word, but... Dawn was saying it now under oath with Diddy, 10 FT away. As she spoke, jurors took notes. Reporters leaned forward and did. He didn't look like the mogul on magazine covers. He looked like a man watching the scaffolding of his legacy snap piece. By piece, and Dawn, she didn't cry, she didn't flinch. She told the truth like someone who knew that hiding it any longer would destroy her more than speaking ever could. But even with everything she had already said, that wasn't the most chilling part of her testimony. That part was still to come. She could still see it. 14 years had passed, but in that courtroom, it was as if she were back there in the echo of that house, in the shadow of that moment. We were in Los Angeles, Don Richards said. Quietly in his house, we were working on music. Everything felt normal until it didn't. The change was sudden, violent, and it started with a plate of eggs. Diddy shouted, "Where's my food?" Then came the silence. Then came the sound of metal scraping. Tile, he picked up a frying pan, a heavy black one still full of eggs, and he swung it at her, at Cassie. He didn't swing it to scare her. He aimed for her head. She dropped to the floor, didn't scream, just curled up. He kept going, blow after blow. Kicks, to her back, to her arms, to her legs, the kind of assault that didn't happen in a burst. It happened in a rhythm, as if it had happened before she stayed in the fetal position. Dawn said she didn't fight. She just took it. There were screams, but not. From Cassie, from the chaos, and then the glass he grabbed her, dragged her across the room, down the stairs. There was glass on the floor, shards, she hit them. They broke more. The whole house was screaming, not with people, but with sound, and yet no. One called for help. Not Dawn. Not anyone. Were you scared? The prosecutor asked. Yes. I was scared for her. I was scared for me. And then came a moment that changed the tone in the room. The moment where this became more than just a violent night. The moment when threat became control. The next day, he said it was a passion thing, that she was fine, that it was best we didn't talk about it. And then he said Dawn looked at the floor, then up again. Some people go missing. That's what he said. Some people go missing. She didn't need to explain it. The jury understood it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise, a reminder that Diddy didn't need fists to dominate. All he needed was the fear of what could happen, and the silence it created for Dawn. The decision not to intervene wasn't weakness. It was survival in a world where Diddy had the power to silence, to erase, and to spin the narrative. Speaking out felt like signing a death sentence, so she stayed quiet until now. Why are you speaking today? Her answer came quickly, because it's time, because it's not just about me. It's about what happened to her, what happened to all of us. And just like that, the courtroom felt different, the walls felt closer, the air heavier. She wasn't just testifying, she was breaking something. And the man sitting 10 FT away, the one who once controlled the music industry, the press. The narrative couldn't stop her. Not anymore. She could have said something in 2009. She could have walked out of that house gone. To the press called the police. But she didn't. And now years later, people would wonder why the truth Don Richard wasn't just afraid of Sean Comey's. She was afraid of what he represented. This wasn't just a man with money and fame. This was someone who had built his entire public identity on influence, on loyalty, on control inside Bad Boy Records. He wasn't just a boss, he was the gatekeeper. He decided who got released, who went on tour, who got a second chance, and if you crossed him, you didn't. Just lose a contract. You disappeared from the conversation, from radio, from relevance. It's hard to explain. Don had told the jury when someone like that is angry. It's not just about what he'll do to you, it's about what he can make other people do to you. The silence around Diddy wasn't accidental. It was cultural. He was protected, not just by lawyers or bodyguards, but by fear itself. Fear of being labeled disloyal. Fear of losing your livelihood. Fear of vanishing from an industry that already forgets women too fast. So Dawn did what so many do in systems of power. She endured. She internalized. She justified it. He told us she was fine. She said that it was just a fight, a passionate moment, that things get out of hand sometimes. And for a long time, Dawn believed that or wanted to. But deep down, the truth remained every time she looked back at that night. The sounds played like a broken record. The frying pan, the glass, the dragging, the silence afterwards still. She said nothing, and years later, when Cassie's lawsuit went public alleging drugging, violence, and coercion, something inside Dawn broke because she realized that what she saw wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger pattern, a system. And for the first time, she wasn't alone, so when she was called to testify, she didn't hesitate. I needed to speak, she said, because I knew what I saw and because I couldn't carry it anymore. But there was another reason, one she didn't say out loud. Not to the jury, not to the lawyers. Because this wasn't just about healing, it was about stopping him. Stopping the silence, stopping the intimidation, stopping the system that allowed it all to exist. Dawn's words were more than testimony. They were the collapse of a wall that had taken decades to build brick by brick behind closed doors under bright lights in private jets and soundproof studios. And when she finished speaking, she didn't cry. She didn't look for validation. She just looked forward because now everything was out there, and the truth was no longer hers to carry alone outside the courthouse. The world was already reacting on social media. Dawn Richards' name began trending within minutes of her testimony, not because she was famous, but because what she said cut deep. It wasn't just the allegations. It was the details, the frying pan, the dragging, the threat. Some people go missing for millions of people watching from their phones, laptops, and living rooms. This wasn't just about Diddy. It was about power and what people are willing to do to keep it. Hashtags exploded as Stand With Dawn Justice for Cassie surviving. Diddy news outlets scrambled to update headlines. Opinion writers called it the reckoning. The music industry avoided for too long. Some fans were heartbroken, others were furious they ever supported him, and some simply couldn't believe it, because how could someone who hosted charity events, who danced with his kids on TikTok, who was once considered a visionary mogul, now be the center of such horror? But inside the courtroom, Diddy's defense had already anticipated the storm. They weren't focused on emotions. They were focused on dismantling the story, their strategy.
That's Cassie
Deny,
Ventura,
deflect,
who's 9 months
destabilize.
pregnant, leaving her home and
They
heading
argued
to
that
federal
all
court
encounters
today. The defense
between Diddy
hit
and
her
Cassie
hard
were
during
consensual, that the
cross-examination,
relationship was
asking
complicated,
her about a
but
stint in
mutual,
rehab for
that the lawsuit was
PTSD.
motivated by money, not truth, that Dawn Richard had no documentation, no video, no proof. They painted her as someone who had turned on a man who once gave her a career. One of Did's lawyers even suggested she was misremembering events, that trauma can confuse details. But that argument didn't land the way they hoped. Because trauma may distort some things, but no one invents the sound of glass shattering, and as the defense continued trying to poke holes, the public only grew louder. Other women began to speak, former assistants. Former security whispers that had circled the industry for years now became public statements. And that's what frightened the defense more than anything. Because this wasn't just about fighting one witness. It was about containing a flood. Diddy's legal team tried to remind everyone of his achievements. The artists he launched, the Grammys. The businesses they highlighted, his philanthropy, his family. But none of it felt relevant anymore, because what mattered now wasn't the hits. It was the harm. And with every hour of courtroom testimony, the image of Diddy as hip-hop royalty faded, replaced by something colder, more calculated, more dangerous. This wasn't a bad breakup. This was a potential pattern of abuse, manipulation, and intimidation wrapped in wealth. And if even half of it was true, then the question wasn't if his empire would fall. It was how fast. What we're witnessing isn't just a trial, it's an unmasking for years. The name Sean Diddy Combs stood as a symbol of success. He sold dreams, built empires, lived large. and in doing so, he convinced the world he was untouchable. But power doesn't erase the truth. It only delays it. And now that delay is over, what Dawn Richard did on the witness stand wasn't just brave. It was devastating because she didn't just testify about what happened to Cassie. She revealed a culture, a system built on fear, silence, and obedience. She didn't cry, she didn't yell, she just told the story. And in doing so, she cracked the foundation of something much bigger than one man. Because if someone with Diddy's fame, fortune, and reach can be called to account, then maybe there's hope for justice in places we once thought unreachable. But this story isn't finished. There are still witnesses to be called, still evidence to be revealed, still truths buried in luxury hotel rooms, and sealed NDA contracts waiting to see daylight. And he may walk free, he may not. But whatever the verdict, his face told us everything the moment Don walked into that room. Because for the first time in his career, he couldn't control the narrative. He couldn't silence the voice. He couldn't stop the truth from being heard. And that is where real power begins to end. So now the world waits for the next testimony, for the next revelation, for the next woman to raise her hand and say, yes, I was there too. Until then, all eyes remain on the courtroom, and all ears are still ringing with what Dawn Richard dared to say out loud.